Now, further on from mixing on iOS, I'm going to talk a bit more specifically about EQ. You think, well, what's EQ? Well, it stands for equalization, and it's to do with frequencies, boosting or cutting frequencies to either as an effect or more commonly to correct deficiencies in the original sound or the original microphone or the original instrument. You could have, for example, a guitar playing through a tiny little practice amp that doesn't have much bass end on it, and you can compensate for that when you play it back by adding more low frequencies. Now, talking of low frequencies, there are a lot of younger people at the moment producing stuff that is very, very heavy in bass because they are more used to large PA systems in clubs where you have a cabinet with 4 18-inch speakers in, for example. It didn't used to be like that. 40 years ago, the capability for bass end was not as much as it is now. Now, also, you've got to be sure that the monitoring system on which you're working accentuates, or it doesn't accentuate any frequency unduly, thereby having a flat response. Now, this pair of headphones is a pair of Sennheiser HD25s. They're nice headphones, but they're not going to be flat in frequency response, nor is any set of monitors you care to mention, because the room will be accentuating frequencies. You might have hard walls, soft furnishings. Indeed, you might have some hearing loss in some part of your frequency range. So the answer is a lot of listening has to take place to particular albums similar to the genre you're working on, for example. So lots of people used to take Donald Fagen's Night Fly in to listen to a pair of speakers to get used to the frequency balance of that speaker system, so that they knew that whenever they were applying EQ to anything, that it was going to be right, or as close to correct as you could get. Now, on my iPad here, I've got open Rainy Night in Georgia, and I've done a full version of this. You can see that on my channel. Please do subscribe for lots more video content to come. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the song just from the beginning, and then I'm going to start homing in on other tracks. I'm going to show you about things like frequencies and what they mean, number of hertz, and roughly what that equates to. So here's the tune from the beginning, just for a few bars. Okay, so there's lots of backing vocals there. There's a Fender Telecaster doing some blues, and there's a Fender bass as well. This is a combination of instruments and real audio. So it's kind of a good place to start with this whole EQ thing. Now, if I go, let's have a look. I'll tell you what, let's start with the drums. Now, the drums are an instrument on GarageBand. It's not necessary to EQ them too much, because all the instruments that have been produced for GarageBand have got, they are very much balanced. They were all sort of worked out very carefully. So the need to apply EQ is perhaps not as stringent as with audio tracks, especially with the internal mic here. And in that instance, you are correcting for deficiencies. So let's look at the drums on their own. Sorry, I'll just solo the drums out. Now, because I'm aiming for a sort of older production, maybe I'd want to cut the very top end a bit. So if I go to the visual EQ, actually I've done the opposite there. I've boosted the ultra top end. Now we have a scale that goes from 20 to 20k. That is the extent of the human frequency band. Frequencies that you can hear, all the way from 20 cycles, which is extremely low bass, to 20,000 hertz or 20k on here, which is the highest frequency that you can hear. And actually that frequency capability diminishes as you get older. So many old people, people in the 70s and 80s might not hear much above 10k, for example. But the answer is you get used to that loss and you don't tend to notice it until, very advanced years. Now, I've got the drums here going through with a bit of a boost at about 7K and upwards. That's to hear the cymbals. Now, if I give you a demo of this, I'm going to cut the top end and boost the top end, and you can hear what it does to the cymbals. Note that this is being done overall on the drums, not just cymbals or snare or bass. You might be able to do that, let's say, if you've recorded an acoustic drum kit and you have individual tracks that you can EQ separately. This is the entire drum kit. Notice that it's really just playing with the cymbals at the moment. The kick drum is virtually unaffected. That's because the kick drum is this end. It's the bass drum, therefore it's over on the left. But you do get some click on that bass drum, the beta, which is slightly higher in frequency. But you get very little at the ultra top end. So you can kind of mix drums a little bit with an equalizer. So if I now look at the bottom end, and vary that, you'll hear that the kick drum is accentuated or diminished. Now at this point, it should be made clear that the vast amount of energy in a sound wave, and well, actually 80% of it, is below 200 Hertz, which is this point here. So if you do a lot of bass boosting, for example, the level is going to climb a long way, whereas if you are playing with the top end, the level's not going to change all that much. So between 20 and 200 Hertz is 80% of your energy in your sound wave, and then from 200 all the way to 20, all the rest of it makes up the 20% remaining. So the bass does make a big difference in terms of your level. So on an old analog mixing desk, for example, if you turn the bass up too much, the overload light will come on, signifying there's much level going through that circuit. So if I just return the bass to the central position, the central line here means that the EQ is not active, essentially, and we have 30 dB boost or 30 dB cut, and that is huge. That is way more than any mixing desk would ever give you. But if you're having to boost frequencies to that sort of level or cut them, it means there's a problem with the source material. So this time I'm going to just play with the mid, and you'll hear that sort of snare click is going to get much louder. Notice that you can also sweep. You can sweep up and down the frequency band to accentuate things that you want. But of course, it's hugely boosting at the moment, so it sounds unnatural. And that's the trick with EQ, is to apply something that still sounds musical, that still sounds natural. It doesn't sound like an effect, unless that's what you want. You might like that. And EQ is used as an effect a lot of the time. So up at the top here, you're given two figures. You're given the frequency. At the moment it says 1080 Hertz with a gain of plus 9.5 dB. So the dB scale is also worth discussing here. 6 dB represents a doubling of your audio level. So minus 6 would be half the level. So plus 12 dB would be 4 times the level. Plus 12 dB would be 4 times the level. So every 6 dB you're going up, you are doubling the level. So 30 dB is masses. 6 dB is doubling, 12 dB is quadrupling, 18 is octupling, 24 is 16 times. So 30 represents a 32 times difference. It's hard to quantify, and the reason why we have the dB scale is because it actually makes more sense when you're describing audio level. So if I cut the frequencies, we now go to a minus dB level, and in the middle it's 0. There we go. Gain 0.0 dB. That means no change in level. Now, on GarageBand, we do have a slight restriction in that you only have one band that you can boost or cut at a particular frequency. But many mixing desks, analog mixing desks, have basically the same capability as this. Only the more expensive consoles would have 2 swept mids. That's called a swept mid, means a mid-range that you can vary the frequency of as well as the gain. So at the ends, usually the bass and the treble will be what are called shelving filters. So when you've got the top end frequency, it just boosts or cuts above a certain frequency all the way to the end of the band. So you can see that from sort of 10 kilohertz upwards, it's just going, it just keeps climbing in gain. Notice that it also affects frequencies around it. Now, this is true of an analog circuit. When you are boosting or cutting a particular frequency, you're never actually just boosting that one frequency. There's always going to be stuff affected around it. You can vary that on some systems with what's called the Q factor, quality factor, which means that you can narrow your band that you're boosting or cutting. And that can be useful if you're trying to notch out a particular resonance. For example, if there's a tom on your drum kit that's got a horrible ringing sound to it. That usually happens if the drummer's toms aren't tuned properly, actually. You can notch out things like that, and that's quite useful. But that's beyond the scope of GarageBand. So if I just take it back down to the bottom there, I can bring the treble frequency all the way back to I can do that sort of thing. It really depends what you want to do. But I'm going to now we've heard the drum kit, I'm going to talk a bit more about corrective EQ. Now I'm going to find the lead vocals wherever they are. I think it's those.
It's a rainy night in Georgia.
Yeah, okay. Now, we're using the internal mic of the iPad here. Now, this is a classic case of needing corrective EQ. Now, this isn't a Neumann U87, this mic. It needs a bit of help. So what I've done here is I've actually taken some of the nasal quality. I've got that in my own voice anyway, but it's going to need a little bit of help at the top end because it lacks top end frequency and also bass. But we want to be a bit careful with adding bass to tracks that don't really need it. The reason being that when you're mixing and you've got lots of tracks, if you've got lots of bass end on all of the tracks, you're going to get this horrible rumbly sort of sound, which is actually wasting energy. Don't forget that 80% of that energy is under 200 hertz. So if you cut stuff that doesn't need bass, it means that the instruments that are bassy, like the kick drum and the bass guitar or the bass synth, or to a certain extent electric guitars and pianos, can be allowed to express, and they're not fighting against needless things. So I'm going to play the vocals back and you can hear the effect of the EQ on those.
Such a rainy night in Georgia. Oh, it's raining all over the world. Raining all over the world.
Now you don't want to take too much bass away because it can make the voice sound a bit tinny and a bit distant. But that is very, very trebly indeed. Now, this also plays into the hands of another question that I was asked from John Tomorrow about noise. How do you remove hiss from audio recordings? Well, one of the ways to do it is to use the treble EQ to reduce those sort of hissy, noisy frequencies. However, if it was there in the first place, it could be audio level, or it could be deficiencies in the mic. The mic, as you can hear, is quite noisy.
Neon signs are flashing.
Typical, it should home in on my bottom D.
Taxi cabs and buses passing through the night. Yeah, baby.
There's all sorts of noise and all sorts of little sort of gremlins going on there. It depends. If you can hear it in the mix, the noise in the mix, then yes, you do have a problem. But if you hear a track that's got a bit of hiss on it and it's kind of just falls into the mix when you put it back in context, it's not such an issue. So recording level is another big issue as well. As you can see on this blue track here, the recording level is actually quite high. In fact, in some places it might even be verging on distorted. But you don't want that, of course. But you want, if you're recording at a very, very low level and you try and boost things, then yes, noise is going to come back. And it could be faulty equipment. I spoke to somebody who said they had a guitar interface for an iPad. In fact, I spoke to them earlier today, saying this thing is really noisy. And okay. And I took note of the make and the model, which I'm not going to reveal because I don't want to sort of put anyone's nose out of joint. But mind you, I've sort of not extolled the virtues of the mic on here, but it is built in. It's just using the internal mic, which really is designed for things like FaceTime and, just making little voice memos. It's hardly designed for a recording studio, so actually we'll cut it a bit of slack here. So if I go out of the vocals now and find, let's find this part is the bass part. Now, this is another thing with noise. Actually, this is quite convenient because what you can do is on your tracks, anything that is bassy and doesn't have much treble, you can roll all the top end off. Now that has an effect of reducing the noise. So if I just go to the visual EQ on the bass part here, I haven't actually cut any of the treble there, but I could have done, because if I play it back, if I boost the treble, I haven't really done anything to the sound because it's bass guitar, it's all bass and mid. But if I take it down here, the track has essentially become noiseless to an extent. You can never say something's noiseless, but you can kind of get on that. So acoustic guitar. Now this is a different ball game because you do need top end for this. Because of the jangly nature of an acoustic guitar and the steel strings, it's a very toppy instrument. So if I boost the treble on this, I can hear bits of noise there, but it's not too bad. It's not too bad at all. The recording level's quite high as well. So if you're recording something, always make sure that you are using the majority of the level. Always allow yourself, 6 dB really, from the loudest thing below maximum, just in case it gets a bit louder. You want to capture everything faithfully without distortion. So the other side, the other guitar track here is just slightly on the other side of the mix. Now I recorded two separate parts there for the sort of stereo acoustic guitar effect. So the other guitar track I've got is an electric guitar. Now this is my Telecaster. Now the nature of electric guitar is that it has a lot of mid frequencies in anyway. So you can afford not to go too mad with your mid-range, and as you can see here, I haven't. I've just cut a little bit of the bass there, as you would do on all the tracks as I described just now. So if I just play back the mix just so we can hear all this in context.
Falling, seems I hear your voice calling, it's alright.
Now, everything there has to have its own space in the frequency band from our 20 hertz to our 20,000. If you've got lots of stuff there that is vying for space, the mix can become quite confused. So at the moment, the mid-range is really, we've got the sort of, the bass and the electric guitar are taking care of that sort of low mid-range, just to the left of the centre of the frequency band. The vocals have a lot of top end, and the acoustic guitars have top end that's a little bit lower than that. So every little bit of the frequency band has got something in it, just to balance it out. Don't forget that also with rock and pop, with anything like this, we are manufacturing the sound. This is very different to recording solo piano or recording a string trio, for example. In those instances, you've got to capture absolutely the sound as it is in the room. That's a whole different ball game from this, because this is completely manufactured out of electronics, out of things like the Fender Telecaster, the bass. Everything is subjective, but we've still got to think about our frequencies. So one other thing that I've got in the sort of low mid range is the organ here. But in order to simulate the click of the Hammond organ, the imperfections of the keys opening the generators, I've actually ramped the treble up by quite a long way. However, because this is a GarageBand sound, you can't hear any noise, any hiss. And that's where using the GarageBand instruments is very advantageous, because suddenly all that hiss that you would have got either from the mic or the interface with your guitar is now gone. And as I was saying just now, the sounds of GarageBand have been very, very carefully balanced and worked out and very carefully produced to make sure that the full frequency range is available and the full range of sounds, of volumes, is available as well. So backing vocals, similar sort of thing. If I just get my 4 vocals here, because they're backing vocals, I can afford to take the top end off a little bit because they are harmony parts. Rainy night. So if I just look at one of these, I've cut the bass end, and unlike the lead vocal, I haven't really boosted the top end at all. So this kind of plays into the hands of the internal mic here, which doesn't have a huge amount of ultra top end on it. So I've kind of used the mic I've used it to my advantage, really, giving the backing vocals a slightly lower frequency bandwidth than the lead vocals. In Georgia. Excuse the tuning once or twice there. Don't tell anybody. So there are my lead vocals. Now, what you can do overall in the mix, and as I've done here with my effects track, if you want to do the mix, if you want to do an overall EQ mix, you open the effects track up, record a bit of the effects with a filter, like this, and then delete what you've just recorded, and it leaves that track there. The advantage being that you can now do things like a master equalization on your track. And as you can see, I've boosted a bit of the mid-range there. Now, as I said in one of my other videos, the mid-range is very often neglected. People think about the tightness of the bass and the clarity, the treble. No, actually, so far, I've been talking about more treble and bass equalization than middle. So this is where you can just compensate for that slight lack of attention to the mid-range. So if I take that EQ away, for example, and you can do that by going into the visual EQ and switching it on or off at the top here. So here it is with the EQ applied, and then I'm going to switch it off, and you can hear a very subtle difference, a lack of clarity in that mid. So now the notes that I'm hearing in the middle just brought out ever so slightly. Now frequency numbers wise, the oboe in the orchestra plays an A to tune the orchestra. That A, la, is 440 cycles per second. So the next A above that is 880, and then 1760 for the next A, and then whatever it is, 3520 for the next one up, which is actually the top A of the piano. So the piano frequency range of fundamental notes goes up to about 3.5 kilohertz. After that, it's all the harmonics of stuff. So you can wake a piano up, for example. If you've got a piano just playing, you can take the frequencies above 3.5 kilohertz and you are bringing out artificially the harmonics that are present in a piano. The only other way you can do that with a piano is to change the hammer tips for hard tips. I remember doing that when I worked at EMI Townhouse in the 90s. We had to change a set of hammer tips on a piano to get more treble out of them, a more sort of a dancey piano. So, and then the notes will go the other way. So the A below the 440 is 220, then 110, and then 55. And 55 hertz is the A string on a bass guitar. So it's worth knowing in terms of things like notes, roughly what your frequencies are. This helps live also. If you're hearing a feedback frequency and you can find it on a keyboard, you can notch that particular frequency out. It's not an exact science, but you can do things like that in those sort of ways. So there we go. There is a sort of a little demonstration of EQ and what it does. And the GarageBand EQ, although it's quite basic with about one swept mid, there's a fair amount you can do with it.